Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, April 11th. Today is the 188th day since the attacks by Hamas on October 7th. Today, our 40th anniversary summit for Churches for Middle East Peace ended here in Washington, D.C. And the last 3 days culminated with a closing prayer vigil on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol. And we had more than 160 people total over the past several days. And today people went all over Capitol Hill representing 35 different states, calling on our members of Congress to support a comprehensive ceasefire, return of hostages, a release of Palestinian prisoners who are being held without due process, immediate and adequate humanitarian assistance into Gaza. We called for the U.S. to put a halt on weapons sales until it can be shown that weapons are being used in accordance with U.S. and international law. And, I have to say it was so encouraging to see so many denominations, people of different Christian traditions coming together from all over the country. And the service that we had today in prayer and in solidarity began with the song, Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Us Around. And we remembered, the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and those civil rights activists who so diligently took to the streets calling for peace and calling for justice. And so we are motivated by their example, but we will not give up hope. We'll be on the local Washington, D.C. ABC News, Channel 7 tonight. Voice of America is going to do something. They said that'll be up in the next few days as well. The most significant news in the Middle East the past 24 hours, at least in terms of international news, has been the conversations around a potential threat or attack by Iran in response to the attack on their embassy, or at least consulate in Damascus, and the U.S. consideration of if U.S. assets and Israel might be attacked, that the U.S. might engage in a counterattack. So an update on that, the Biden administration's Middle East envoy, Brett McGurk, called the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Iraq, and asked them to deliver a message to Iran, urging it to lower its tensions with Israel. And according to news sources, Iran did so, said a source with knowledge of the situation. That's according to Reuters. A senior U.S. official told Al Jazeera that the U.S. is not ruling out the possibility of launching a joint attack on Iran with Israel if the Islamic Republic responds to the assassination of their senior IRGC general earlier this month. So that conversation is being considered a possible joint attack on Iran if Israel were to be attacked. The official also said that if Israel comes under attack by missiles or drones, we will not rule out the possibility of helping the Israelis intercept them. Senator Mark Rubio described current tensions between Israel and Iran as the most dangerous Middle East moment since 1973, which, of course, if you're familiar with history, that was the war with Egypt in 1973. Germany's foreign minister Baerbock discussed Mideast tensions with her Iranian counterpart, urging all sides to act responsibly and to exercise restraint. The Kremlin said Israel's attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus last week was a violation of all principles of international law, and they called on all countries in the region to exercise restraint. Russia's foreign ministry told citizens that they should refrain from traveling to the Middle East, especially Israel, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories. In other news, the U.S. aid's top administrator, Samantha Power, said that there is famine in North Gaza. She's the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. She's the first American official to classify extreme hunger in parts of Gaza as famine. She says there's a credible assessment that famine has begun in northern Gaza. And, global experts have warned for months that nearly all of the population of Gaza will soon face extreme hunger. On yesterday, UNICEF said that one of their vehicles that was waiting to enter into northern Gaza had been hit by live ammunition, showing further evidence that those seeking to deliver humanitarian aid are under threat of attack. They raised the matter with Israeli authorities, but it's further evidence that the delivery of aid is nearly impossible in northern Gaza. Samantha Power gave her comments during a congressional testimony that happened yesterday. She was asked by Representative Castro from Texas about news reports that staff members from her agency had sent a cable to the National Security Council saying that famine had already begun in parts of the Gaza Strip. The cable was first reported by the Huffington Post. CMEP had a meeting with U.S. aid officials a couple of weeks ago, and it was a hard-hitting meeting, and we really challenged them to speak more loudly. And we just want to give credit, good for them for speaking the truth about what's happening in Gaza. Castro asked Samantha Power, do you think it's plausible that North Gaza is already experiencing a famine? And she cited the Global Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Initiative, which I've talked about that classification system previously. She said that in the report, food shortage in Gaza had become so severe that famine is imminent. And she said it's their assessment, and we believe the assessment is credible. And so Castro said, does that mean famine is already occurring there? And Ms. Powers said, yes, that is yes. She said later in her testimony also that the rate of severe malnutrition has become markedly worse since October 7th, and that in northern Gaza, the rate of malnutrition prior to October 7th was almost 0, and it's now 1 in 3 kids. She also added that in terms of actual severe acute malnutrition for those under 5 years old, the rate was 16% in January. By February, that had risen to 30%. We're waiting for the March numbers, but we expect it to continue. She also urged Congress to press Israeli partners to follow through with the commitments they've made. And she said that the U.S. has no evidence from its partner organizations that Hamas has been seizing food aid on a significant scale. Israel has accused Hamas of stealing aid meant for Gazan civilians. Hamas officials have denied this. And in February, U.S. Special Envoy for Humanitarian Issues Satterfield said that Israel had failed to provide evidence that Hamas was stealing aid shipments. Ms. Powers said, we're not seeing Hamas dictating where food is being provided. And I can assure you, if the government of Israel saw Hamas doing that, we would be hearing about it, which is quite significant. Israel also announced a new operation against Hamas a day after they killed one of Hamas's top heroes' sons. They're talking about Hananiah's family. The Israeli military announced that it is doing precise operations to kill members of different Hamas members in Gaza. And so several members of Mr. Hananiah's family, including his son, this is Ismail Hananiah, he's the political bureau chief of Hamas. He lives in exile. 3 of his sons have been killed in an airstrike in northern Gaza on Wednesday, according to reports, and also 3 of his grandchildren were killed in an attack. Israel says it's also working still to open the border crossing for aid to northern Gaza. To be clear, what we're talking about is no work has yet been done to increase aid by opening an additional border crossing from Israel and accepting shipments at a nearby Israeli port. But Israel said yesterday that both changes are in the works. Facing international condemnation after the strike that killed the World Central Kitchen aid workers, Israel said that it will reopen that northern checkpoint that's called Erez. But satellite imagery taken earlier this week showed the road leading to Erez has still been blocked by rubble from a destroyed building, a crater, and other damage that has been visible from the last week and the last month. A spokesperson to the defense minister, Gallant, said yesterday that another crossing into northern Gaza near Zakim, a kibbutz, would open instead, and not the one near Erez. It's not clear if that was because of the damage to Erez. So to be clear, in parts of North Gaza, a few 100,000 people are surviving on an average, listen to this, 245 calories a day, according to Oxfam, an aid group. UN figures show that an average of about 110 aid trucks a day have entered every day since October 7th. The daily average has risen since February, but not nearly enough. It is still far, far lower than the 500 trucks a day of commercial goods and aid that arrived each day before the war. And just remember, that was when water was turned on. That was when the needs were not as great as they are today. Israel maintains that aid agencies have failed the responsibility to distribute aid, and the groups say that's fundamentally not true. Israel has not created safe conditions that would allow them to distribute aid effectively. I also would say that there are photographs where Israel says that the number of trucks allowed in has spiked significantly. The coordination office called COGAT of the Israeli military has been writing on social media saying that there's an average of 400 trucks a day that have entered every day over the last 3 days. The agency posted photographs of street vendors in North Gaza selling cucumbers, potatoes, and juice, saying that these are the markets in northern Gaza, which is such propaganda. I mean, you literally just heard me say that the head of USAID is saying there's a famine in North Gaza, and you have the Israeli military showing pictures of, street vendors selling cucumbers, potatoes, and juice. It's such nonsense. I don't even have words for it. Biden has said that Israel has improved aid flow, but that much more must be done. And Hamas has said that they might not have 40 hostages who meet the specific terms of the potential swap with Israel that's been negotiated. This assertion has raised fears that more hostages might be dead than previously believed. And this came as talks between Hamas and Israel stalled amid disagreements over the permanency of a ceasefire, the return of displaced Palestinians to the north, and other issues. International negotiators have proposed a 6-week ceasefire. Hamas would release the first group of 40 hostages. It would include women, older people, sick hostages, 5 of the female Israeli soldiers in exchange for hundreds of Palestinians. Israeli officials believe there could be 130 hostages left. Hamas has reported that at least 30 of those have died in captivity. It's not clear what the situation is. It could be that young men, soldiers, could be included in those first 40 captives, but hostages have been expected to wait for a later the men and the soldiers have been expected to wait until a later phase of the hostage deal. So much for us to still work toward, and that is the update for today.